Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrell, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by ACE, the HR Exam, and Upskill HR. These are two courses we offer at Workology for certification prep and recertification for HR leaders. You can learn more about those courses at Workology.com. In this episode, we're talking about global payroll and employer of record, or EOR services. If your organization is hiring across borders or managing remote teams around the world, understanding how payroll and global employment actually work in those countries is critical. And that's where EORs come into play. An employer of record, or EOR, is a third-party organization that legally employs workers on your behalf in another country. They handle things like payroll taxes and compliance, so you can hire quickly and stay on the right side of local laws. It's different from administrative service organizations, or ASOs, which support HR and payroll administration, but doesn't take on that legal employment responsibility. Believe me, I know this is a lot to digest and can be confusing, and that is exactly why we are talking with today's guest. Before I introduce our guest for today, I do want to hear from you. Please comment podcast over on my pin post on Instagram. You can head over to Workology blog there to ask questions, leave comments, and make suggestions for future guests. I do want to hear from you. I am talking more about technology and HR technology implementation, selection, and research because we've just launched our new Workology Marketplace. It's a place, it's a destination for you to start your HR technology research. And I am including my favorite HR technology companies by category, company size, and reviews and information, all for you. So head on over to marketplace.workology.com to learn more. We have new category pages that just launched, including employer of record, which is why I'm so excited to be chatting with today's guest. Today's guest is Pete Tiliakos. He's the Principal Analyst and Strategic Advisor for Payroll Influences. Pete is a recognized global thought leader in payroll, employer of record services, and HR technology. As the Principal Analyst and Strategic Advisor at Payroll Influences, Pete brings over 30 years of deep expertise in HR and payroll transformation, technology, and services. His insights are widely sought after by practitioners and providers alike. He's a top contributor in industry publications, associations, and events. He also co-hosts the HR and Payroll 2.0 podcast, where he helps decode the evolving world of workforce technology and global employment. Now, before launching Payroll Influences, Pete held leadership roles across Fortune 100 payroll operations, HRO solution design, and Big Four consulting, as well as serving as the HR technology and services research for leading analyst firms. He's a U.S. Marine Corps veteran with an MBA and a BS in business administration and HR management. Pete combines analytical rigor with hands-on experience to help organizations navigate the fast-changing payroll and EOR landscape with confidence and clarity. Pete, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's always nice to hear someone read your read your bio and it's not yourself, you know?
That is a benefit of being a guest on podcasts or being a speaker. It's like, oh, hey, maybe.
Yeah, who's that?
That guy sounds a little interesting.
Yes, thank you.
Of course. You've said that payroll modernization is no longer optional. Can you talk to us about what's driving the shift and what does modern payroll actually look like for today's organizations?
Yeah, well, I get asked this a lot, and I think there's this interesting convergence that's happened, right? Of the awakening that we are starting to realize how critical and how important and how valuable payroll is. And I think that convergence is somewhat a mix of innovation, sure, right? We've got a lot of digitalization happening everywhere, up and down sort of the value chain. But also the complexity of which payroll is operating under has become compounded exponentially, especially since COVID, right? If you look at last year, 2024, something like 50% of the global population around the world went to the polls, right? Which means what? There's going to be legislation that comes from that, right? Changes that incumbents and new folks want to enact. And I think that's what you continue to see, are these pops in sort of compliance changes, right? Now, underpin that with the fact that all of that complexity hasn't really modernized a lot in the past. And we've just sort of started getting, an infusion of innovation around payroll in the last, I'd say, 10 years. And you've got a lot of organizations that are really behind modernization wise, just like they are probably in HR. I know there's many companies still not in the cloud. And so you mix all that together with the fact that payroll hasn't been immune to the talent loss, right? And we're not exactly we were never really bringing people into payroll as a first stop. They were kind of finding their way here and staying, thankfully. But bottom line is that we're bleeding talent and skill out of the payroll space. It's getting harder. It's getting compounded. And you've also got firms that are increasingly inching beyond borders now because they need to find talent and they need to operationalize strategies and different things to grow. And so you just mix all that into a big soup. And I think what you're finding is that companies are waking up to the fact that payroll is incredibly critical. It can be strategic. It can be a strategic enabler, and that they've been missing out on a lot of opportunity, a lot of ROI in the data and the insights that payroll has. So really a necessary awakening that might be a little bit behind schedule.
I know that I didn't always think of payroll in this way, but kind of the new world, the global world that we're living in post-COVID, I feel like has kind of shifted those things. Many organizations say their payroll operations might lack agility and innovation, which you have alluded to a little bit. What do you think the biggest barriers are that are preventing organizations from being modern with their payroll operations? And then what can we do to help overcome those?
Well, I think the first problem we have is there's a big misunderstanding for what payroll is and what they do, right? I like to liken it to an iceberg in my research, right? There's sort of this tip of the iceberg above the waterline that you see that's maybe the checks that come out or some complaining or not, hopefully, and maybe reports, right? Leaders may want and see, reports coming from payroll. But below that waterline is a whole world of complexity and difficulty, regardless of how big the company is. And of course, if it gets bigger, that scales and compounds, especially in a global organization. And I think that what you're finding is that companies, look, today the most valuable thing is not it's not oil anymore. It's computing power and data. Payroll sits on arguably the most underutilized, but yet most accurate and richest data set in the organization. Right? If we call up, if something changes in our lives, we call payroll first, generally, because we want to make sure that paycheck's right. And so payroll often curates with this very rich data set that goes overlooked and sort of misunderstood. The ramifications of their actions or inactions can literally bring the company to a halt. And put people in jail. Right? Leaders can go to jail if payroll doesn't do their job, if taxes don't get paid or reported properly. And I don't know that companies realize the danger that they operate in, and this level of importance and complexity that payroll is dealing with. I just think that that's completely overlooked. And so because of that, you get this idea that, well, it's just printing checks. We can just buy a new software. That's all it is. But the reality of it is it really needs to be a strategic partner, very well aligned with HR, and certainly very well aligned with your strategy. So.
It's not just checks when your payroll goes wrong.
No, yeah. Very serious. It's very serious. I don't know that companies realize that.
I have worked in organizations that were really sales oriented. And so payroll cycles for bonuses and your commissions are different. And if you don't provide people ample notification to let them know when they're going to be paid, people are unhappy and they're very vocal about it. So making sure you have good systems that can process payment, vacation, all the things are really critical to the success of the organization.
It's a massive trust factor, right? We didn't even talk about that. I really leaned into the compliance element of this, but yeah, let's think about that, right? Just the trust that employees would have for an employer and the brand, and the transparency of how they're being paid and the fairness and all of that. It's very, very important, right? It's part of the employee experience. So yeah, big factor.
Your research shows that half of payroll and time solutions could be replaced within the next 12 to 24 months. Talk to us about what's behind this turnover and maybe what HR leaders should consider before making a change like this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, what I think you find is about half of payroll operations are fundamentally unfit to handle where their businesses are headed. And that's scary, right? That means that half of the payroll operations are unprepared for the future. And that's not just tech, that's people, that's adequate resources, that's the, just having that seat at the table and that engagement with the leadership team to know what's coming and how to help them handle it. You got to remember payroll can help the organization see around the next corner, right? Use its data, use its insights, protect it from that, making bad decisions from a compliance perspective. And so, I think what you really see is organizations are needing to fortify that pay experience for the employee, right? Bring that to be a more modern state. There's expectations have changed for insights and transparency. So there's a push there, a bottoms up pull, if you will. Again, compliance and fortifying the business, making sure that payroll is scalable and resilient and able to handle where their business is headed, and putting their business in the best position possible. So I think that's and accessing that data, right? Remember, if you could take that payroll data and pair it with other workforce data, operations data, external data, wow. Now the organization can see around the next corner. Now they can be very agile. And so I think payroll can be a very, very trusted advisor to the business in so many ways from a compliance and an insights perspective. That's really why people are making that change to modernize.
And with all these different systems that have all this data, like you said, payroll data is the most accurate and probably long-standing piece of information data that you have. But imagine bringing all those things together. And I don't think, myself included, a lot of HR professionals have given that a lot of thought. And I'm glad that we're talking about this, because hopefully we can maybe influence some change in
Absolutely.
this area.
Yeah. It's a partner, strategic partner.
What you call a growing employee wellness emergency. How is payroll tied to the employee experience and the total well-being, especially when we're thinking about a borderless workforce?
Yeah. Well, so look, I think you have to think about payroll now as an experience, right? A pay experience. Payroll is really just the vehicle. Honestly, they can hardly control most of what that experience contains. And I would say that experience should include modality of pay, right? Some people want crypto, some people want a check, some people want earned wage access, and those things are helping employees, get that flexibility in and personalization in their experience. But they want to be able to trust what they're seeing. They want to know how it's computed, how fair is it, right? How equitable, and all of those things, total rewards, all of that stuff comes together to really make up a pay experience that payroll then has to fundamentally execute on and deliver. And that has to be timely, accurate, and of course, compliant. And accurate is really what the employee is going to care about, right? They want it to the penny and perfect, as it should be. And that's where trust comes in, right? And so I think all of that is regardless of where someone is in the world, we all want that same thing. And I think you see more and more organizations looking at their pay experience as a part of as a compartmentalized piece of the employee experience, a broader employee experience. Of course, there's much more in that. And I think they're also, being more mindful, particularly in the enterprise space. I'm seeing more organizations starting to nudge payroll closer with total rewards and benefits. So you're getting that comp and ben and payroll kind of working together as a COE in some ways and bringing that experience to light. So I think that's a really key trend that I see that I think is very, very positive.
Let's take a reset, shall we? This is Jessica Miller-Merrell, and you are listening to the Workology Podcast, powered by ACE the HR Exam and Upskill HR. Today, we are talking with Pete Tiliakos, Principal Analyst and Strategic Advisor for Payroll Influences. And we're talking about global payroll and EORs. And if you're looking to start your HR technology selection journey, head on over to the Workology Marketplace. It's marketplace.workology.com. Talk to us about maybe an area of payroll or kind of a related category, maybe that some of us might not be familiar with, and that is EORs.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of what an EOR is in terms of the breakdown difference between employer of record and what's called an administrative service organization, or AOS?
Yeah. So think about let's think about it in U.S. context, right? In America, you typically would go out and get HR services, particularly in the smaller market customer sizes, right? Below a certain number of employees, you'd probably go out to a provider to get help, right? You might go to an ASO provider, an administrative services only provider, or you might go to a PEO. Now, the difference between those two, a PEO is going to be more of a co-employment sort of arrangement, right? They're going to be transferring liability, on paper from a legal perspective and providing you with an HR service, benefits, workers' comp, and lots of other things. So there's sort of one's an employment model, PEO, and the other is a services model, a compliance service. PEO is made up of payroll and compliance services, but other services as well, because there is an element of co-employment. Again, they have to make sure they're doing all the right things as the employer of record. So imagine if you could take that same construct and take it outside of the United States. Now, it doesn't exactly transfer legally, but what there is are options for people to be able to employ people in other locations beyond borders. So imagine for a moment the EOR model being an opportunity for me as a business owner to step into a location where I might not have business nexus. I might not know anyone there, but I know I want to be in Romania because it's the right thing for my product and I've done this research and whatever, but I need a salesperson to help me get going. An EOR can help that employer come to market and compliantly hire a local worker who does know the market and does have expertise in that space to help them begin to kind of land and expand and grow. And then over time, potentially the employer might set up their own business nexus and begin to grow into a need where they need a more managed service, where they're employing the employees on their own, but they want to have a managed service. That would be more like an ASO here in America, more like a multi-country or a local payroll need. What I think you have to think of EOR as is the ability, is really an agility enabler for a business. Again, the ability to maybe carve out a business or acquire one quickly and be able to pay and manage them in a place that you don't have experience. But it's also, again, an employment model. It's not just a payroll service, right? It's a payroll heavy service, but EOR is fundamentally an employment model, whereas payroll, managed payroll, or ASO really is the same thing. Administrative services, managed services would be a managed payroll service, just focused on processing payroll, but all the liability and sort of employment work is done by the employer. So a little bit different ways of going about kind of the same thing, but one's an employment model, one is a managed compliance service.
Thank you for sharing the distinction because I don't think, like, when I go out on the vendor floor at HR Tech, I just see the EOR section. I wasn't necessarily thinking about the larger, but then as I dove in to more research into this, it's like, holy cow, EORs are a great way to help an organization grow quickly, especially when maybe they're in the SMB category. I wanted to ask you about what's fueling this growth and how are EORs expanding beyond just payroll and like global compliance?
Yeah. Well, I think what's fueling this is just this, again, go back to the talent crunch, right? We talked about in payroll. It's in every sector, right? Everybody's challenged with this. And so finding talent means that you can't just hire within your 50-mile radius right anymore and post a job posting and say, well, more bodies means more productivity and we'll just get someone, to fill this position. It's not that simple anymore, right? And so sometimes companies are having to get very creative, especially when they need very specific skills. And they're going beyond borders to do that. Or they're using the use case that I mentioned. And there's lots of use cases, but say they want to set up shop in a country that they just aren't familiar with, but they know is a viable option for their product and their service. I've studied many of these companies, and a lot of them, it's just they're in hyper growth mode and they're moving fast and they need to be very agile, and they need to be very agile with their talent model. I think everyone needs today to really open up every channel possible for talent. And sometimes that means going places that you didn't think you'd do business. I think you've also got those compliance things that are happening. Like I said, we're seeing a pop of compliance issues, right? I just did a podcast on the H-1B visa challenges, right? EOR is an opportunity to sort of work around that. Let's say you need a skill set in India or Malaysia that you can't necessarily afford to bring onshore because of that tax or I don't know, some people are calling it a tariff, that charge or that extra fee for the H-1B. Which, by the way, there's a lottery. You can only get so many H-1Bs every year anyway, which we learned in that, is you could use the EOR model to go to that country and pick up that skill and employ them very compliantly and very easily through the EOR model. So there's just a number of ways in which I think people have challenges in the global workforce that have posed themselves, a talent shortage, compliance challenges that are having the opportunity for EORs to help with that. Now, what I would just kind of back in that with is to understand is that probably, in the same way that it is maybe state by state in a lot of cases here in America, every country is and locality is very, very different. Payroll is a very local service, right? So much of it is local nuanced and last mile sort of compliance, right? Turning in tax filings or remitting payments and that sort of thing. That has to happen with experts on the ground. And so that's again where if you're going into these countries and you're doing business at scale or in small pockets, you need to be able to handle that compliance of making sure all of the end to end for payroll by itself, let alone HR's rules and requirements around employment and fair, how they have to pay people and how they have to, what contracts have to say and job postings have to, include. All of that's really, really complex and very unique to that location that you're going to. You can't take a one size, what fits in America or fits in the UK, you can't cookie cutter sort of stamp that into another country and assume that you're going to be able to operate the same way. It just won't work. So all of that, I think, is just a brew, a soup for people to say, this is really complicated. Let me go and get help. And I think the EORs have really stepped up and brought all of those things to the table and done it in a technology driven way to help people solve this.
And US-based companies or companies that have employees in the US but maybe are beginning to grow globally, they're thinking about this. I in fact just saw a news headline about Walmart and how they are stepping away from H-1B visas altogether. So I think we'll see more. Yeah, I think we'll see more of that because that fee, $100,000, is a significant increase that it's for renewals and new visas. So it's huge.
A lot remains to be seen what's going to happen there. I'm keeping an eye on that closely.
Yeah, there's a lot of litigation that's going on. I just saw the Chamber of Commerce filed lawsuits.
Yeah.
So it's going to be in flux for a while.
I feel for the folks that are caught in the middle. There's got to be folks on an H-1B right now that are probably like, what's going to happen?
Sure.
I really worry about them. And of course, I'm sure there's projects and things that are hinged on those H-1Bs being a part of those projects. So hopefully they continue. So
especially when they've been maybe living in the States for a period of time. Yeah. They've got kids and families and people in schools and things. It's bigger than just one person's employment.
It is.
Let's talk more about the EOR market because it has exploded and there are now over 140 providers, probably 2 more by the time we finish recording this podcast. Yep. And it feels like a lot of the sea of sameness. It's a lot of very little differentiation, at least on the surface. How can organizations cut through the noise and evaluate quality and risk with so many options?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's a Wild West. I've been saying this since I wrote the first market analysis in 2020, that this is a bit out of control, right? There's sort of everybody's doing it now. And look, I'll just tell you that this is risky stuff, right? I mean, there is risk to doing this. Even if you have an EOR, right, you're still responsible at the end of the day. And so you really have to understand what you're buying and do they have the capability? Do they have the entities locally? Do they have skilled resources in that country that know those nuances and can support you, with legal contracts and legal representation for all of the things that are necessary to employ somebody fundamentally? You really need to understand who's sort of like what you're paying for. This stuff is very, very expensive, right? It's a very heavy load PEPM for this because it's a lot of risk and there's a lot of risk for both sides. And so you really need to understand what you're paying for, what you're getting, what's included, what's not, because there is a lot of sort of DIY, sort of low cost things out there, but that number is not fully loaded. So you have to be very careful. This shouldn't be cheap if it's right. And I think you also have to think about the tech and the experience of that, right? What is that, what sort of volume are you going to put through this and how does that experience need to fit you? So there's a lot here. And I think a lot of the differentiation is on expertise and customer experience, right? What is the customer and the employee experience for this, or the worker's experience in this case? And how will that work with what you're doing? So a lot to think about in that way. And of course, you have to think about this in terms of your strategy and how long, this makes sense for and for what reasons and what purposes. So, but I think it's about finding a partner, right? Someone that can help you, can materially show you they can do the work and have done it for folks just like yourself and a footprint just like yours, and that have the credentials and the infrastructure to handle it.
Thank you. It's like I said, there's a new one popping up every day and their websites all look the same and their CTA and it's like, what does all this mean,
Yeah.
and how do we make sense when, if we're the chief HR officer and this is a huge investment
Yeah.
for people that we are looking to support our organization with, and then do they really do what they say they do? That's
Yeah.
always my big concern.
Look, I like to tell people, I think it's one of the best kept secrets that CHROs really need to have in their back pocket. Maybe even CFOs, right? And corp development type folks need to, especially in smaller companies, need to have at their disposal to an agility lever to pull, right? To say, hey, we need some agility here, especially with talent to move quickly, to move at this market, or to be a first mover into a certain place, or execute on a strategy, or deal with a merger, or deal with a divestiture. If you've ever been on the other end of an M&A as HR or payroll, it's stressful and it's hectic. It's a lot of work, and there's a lot of moving parts. You're not always first to know about certain things. And so having some help, especially when it's requiring another country, is very refreshing. And so I think it's that agility lever that I think every CHRO needs at their disposal.
How do you see payroll and EOR solutions supporting total talent strategies, especially as we are mixing permanent, contract, and now these global workers?
Yeah. Well, look, anywhere you're gonna have people, a person's involved, there's pay going to be involved, right? And wherever there's people and pay involved, there's going to be compliance, and right, and on and on and on. And so I think from an HR and payroll perspective, having the confidence that you can scale and flex and move with your organization is incredibly critical today, right? Agility is at an absolute finite resource, but it is a competitive advantage. And those that have the infrastructure of not just technology, right? You need modern technology, you need data and insights, but you need people and expertise, right? We're going to get to a very autonomous world. We need to have people infused in that process along the way, but people that know what they're looking at, experts that can look at that output and say, hey, this is right, or hey, this isn't right. Hey, we need to do something here, or check that there, or test this, or whatever. So I think you're going to need that people, process, and technology infrastructure modernized, working very well together, but having partners to supplement those moments and gaps in your strengths and resources. And that's what I love about tech and services today, is that it has a very modular approach where you can plug and play. If you're really good at payroll in North America, fine, create a shared services and run that. But maybe if you're not in, say, Mexico or Brazil, get some help and maybe have a partner take that on for you. And payroll and EOR can be there to really help. Global or multi-country payroll can be there to help you underpin those decisions. Plenty of partners out there willing to help you enter new markets and handle new markets, or handle existing ones that you may not want to deal with anymore because you're just not sufficient at it resource-wise. So I think it's going to go hand in hand. Payroll, compliance, and EOR are all going to go hand in hand with sort of the future of work, if you will. We're going to get more nimble and more agile. Talent has to come from many, many different ways now. It can't just come from one source. And so we need a way to actually employ them and fundamentally care for them in the right way. So I think it's here to stay for sure.
And having a plan and strategy for multiple scenarios in place. So even if you aren't employing people globally, it sounds like it's a good idea to be familiar with the topic, which is why we're here today, and start your search. Become familiar with some different vendors, technologies, and start asking questions and learn. There's a lot of information. You have your podcast where you cover so much content and research to help them. I think that's the lesson for me. Like, don't wait until the acquisition happened or you are in the know finally. Sometimes you aren't in the know until after it's happened or while it's happening.
Oh, yeah.
But so plan for those possibilities and educate yourself so that you can be prepared and have that seat at the table to talk with the leaders. Like, yes, we've been looking at different scenarios. Here are some options that we have to be able to make this maybe a smoother transition. So
yeah. Bring that point of view is always going to help. So
it's just going to help HR be more strategic, seen as a strategic partner in the business instead of someone who's there to react after the fact, which is unfortunately a lot of our jobs.
Jessica, in my research, I have something called the 5 pillars of modern payroll, and one of the things in there, aside from the pay experience and compliance center of expertise, one of the things in there that I have is just the point that payroll is going to have to help HR facilitate access to talent anywhere. And that means payroll being very nimble and being able to work very closely with HR. So that's what I hope out of this, is that if nothing else, HR and payroll come closer together on being in lockstep on strategic moves like this, because it really does have to be a very team-oriented effort in this case.
And that's why I'm so happy that you were willing to come on the podcast and share your knowledge, Pete. Where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, well, you can get all my research for free. There's no PII, there's no gatekeeping. There's plenty of EOR cases and payroll cases. There's the Payroll Profession Confidence Index that has that 5 pillars of modern payroll. You can find that at payrollinfluences.com. You can also find me on HR and Payroll 2.0 podcasts. And of course, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter under Pete Tiliakos. I'm happy, open door. I'm happy to help and have a conversation with anyone. I get a number of buyers that come to me. I study buyers and advise vendors, but I get a number of buyers that come to me and ask my opinion of what they're thinking in their RFPs and their paths to transformation, and happy to talk to anyone about any of these things. So
thank you. And I will say, Pete's really easy to talk to, because
thank you.
I slid into his DMs on LinkedIn and he was like, yes, let's do it. So he is responsive. And you don't always get that, I think, from a lot of experts because they're overwhelmed. But you're the real deal. So we're going to link to resources, including the podcast and Pete's LinkedIn, so you can connect with him and slide into his DMs for all things related, payroll and more. So thanks again, Pete. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
This has been such an insightful conversation with Pete Tiliakos. Global payroll and EOR solutions are redefining how companies expand, hire, and manage their talent around the world. And as Pete reminded us, this isn't just about compliance, it's about agility, employee experience, and building systems that can scale fast as your business does. And I love that we're covering this topic. If you are considering an EOR or exploring how to modernize your payroll operations, today's discussion is a great place to start. I would encourage you to connect with Pete on LinkedIn to learn more about his research at payrollinfluences.com. And don't forget to visit Workology, because not only do we have resources on our podcast, over 430 episodes, but we also have a great marketplace for you to help begin your HR technology selection and research process. Head on over to marketplace.workology.com for more resources about HR tech, payroll, and managing that global workforce. I want to thank you for joining the Workology podcast, sponsored by Workology's learning platform for HR certification and recertification and our manager training. Visit that HR tech marketplace at marketplace.workology.com. This podcast you're listening to is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. My name is Jessica Miller-Merrell. Until next time, visit workology.com to listen to all our past episodes on Workology. We'll see you next time.